think the vaccines are going to be announced very soon. And I think you're going to see great companies announcing these vaccines. I spoke with Pfizer today. I speak with the different companies, Johnson & Johnson, as you know, doing really well. Moderna. We have tremendous talent, tremendous scientists, and they're really right there. And I think you're going to hear some very good news. And also, to me, maybe even better, I think when it comes to therapeutics, you're going to have some incredible news coming out very soon.
I love it when Trump gets all doctor-esque when talking about pandemic-related issues. Anyways, Alex Kapitko here on the Tonic Accord podcast, catching you guys up today. It is Sunday here, and I kind of just want to share my thoughts on what I think about this rush to expedite a vaccine potentially before the November elections. And so for anyone who doesn't know, over the last couple of weeks, it's been reported that inside the United States, there is a growing rush to release a vaccine, even while skipping the phase 3 trial period. And this is when companies, health experts, doctors, scientists would basically look into the vaccine and see if there's adverse effects, adverse risks, health complications, anything in that sort. And so Dr. Nirav Shah, who is Maine's CDC director, told many different sources that there is always going to be an inherent risk in distributing a vaccine before these phase 3 trials are complete. And so that's definitely a problem that needs to be addressed. And then also another concern is that other health officials say that there are political motivations with releasing this vaccine right before a general election, especially an election like this: pandemic, economic problems, Trump-Biden protests, you name it. And so I've heard a lot of political experts on the right and the left talking about this idea of an October surprise, where the Trump administration helps expedite a vaccine right before the election, and maybe that sways public opinion. I don't know. But today we're going to dive into that on Catching Up here on the Tonic Accord podcast. I've got some comments and messages from friends saying that I need to kind of make the background for these a little bit more exciting. Clearly you see some old family photos, a couch, a white wall, dark window. I don't know, it's pretty exciting. But trust me, I do have a bookshelf over here. It just doesn't really work with where my desk is at right now. So I'm kind of trying to figure out how to reallocate everything in here to make the background more exciting for you guys. So I'm working on it. But anyways, I think the big question I want to kind of frame this whole discussion about is, should the states allow the vaccine to be expedited? Secondly, should the states give a rushed vaccine to their citizens? And I think this is a murky question and a tough answer, because the United States government has emergency powers to expedite a vaccine during a time of crisis, especially like this, when you have the economy in turmoil, a pandemic globally happening, travel bans, political chaos. To me, this does seem like a good time for emergency powers. But also the problem is that just because you can make a vaccine quickly doesn't mean you should. And so in this catching up, I kind of want to express my 3 largest concerns about this. And I'm going to give some examples and video context and all that, blah, blah. So getting into my first concern, which is that expediting a vaccine could be dangerous. I've heard some people, and not to stereotype, but a lot of them are on the left, and they say that it's not legal, it's unethical, etc. So this shouldn't happen, and it's not going to happen. And I just want to make it clear, it's definitely possible, and I'm convinced it's going to happen. And pretty much any country in the world can use emergency authorization to do something exactly like this. I'm going to talk about it more later, but Russia did this already. In the last couple of weeks, Putin has expedited a dangerous but arguably effective vaccine. And this is what the US is doing right now. They are using something inside of the FDA called the Emergency Authorization Act. And according to the FDA website, this basically allows the FDA to help strengthen the nation's public health protections by facilitating the availability and use of MCMs needed during public health emergencies. So this is possible, and that's clearly what they're doing here. And, I think if we were in less of a divisive country, and maybe if Trump wasn't president and we had kind of just more of a normal back and forth, I don't know if this would be as controversial. So first off, this is going to happen. I do believe that there's going to be some form of a vaccine coming out relatively soon. And the FDA is speeding this up. And I've heard a lot of concerns, like I mentioned, that skipping, stage 3 is dangerous. And probably the bigger problem for me is that the Trump administration has a record of abusing the FDA and questioning their efficacy, their authority, and their ability to do their job. And I think this doesn't really help the case that now Trump is somewhat forcing the FDA to do this. And like, this is what, let me see here. So according to the ABC, the administration has been kind of like attacking the credibility of the FDA to a certain extent. So here's a quote. A second Trump administration appointee has been ousted at the FDA in the wake of the agency's botched announcement about an experimental therapy for COVID-19, which medical experts said damaged the health regulator's credibility with the public. And I'm just using this quote because I think it does highlight the fact that these organizations, under especially the Trump administration and also previous administrations, have had kind of a struggle with efficacy and credibility. And so now we're all of a sudden putting them into a staunch battle about a pandemic. We're going to need hundreds of millions of vaccines. I just worry that because Trump doesn't have a lot of faith in our federal institutions, and because these institutions are so reliant on him, it could be interesting. So it's worrying. So honestly, I can't help but wonder if the FDA is even prepared to handle something like this. I also find it kind of ironic and I guess counterintuitive that Trump is calling out the FDA and questioning their credibility, but also he's relying on them to push forth a very controversial rushed vaccine. It's it's kind of funny in a very sad, dark, nihilistic way. And also along the way, I think if this doesn't work, he's going to deteriorate public trust in the organization itself. And this has already been happening. I mean, the New York Times here, I'm reading reports that Trump tweeted, the deep state or whoever over at the FDA is making it very difficult for drug companies to get people in order to test the vaccines and therapeutics. Obviously, they are hoping to delay the answer until after November 3rd. Must focus on speed and saving lives. So this tweet is amazing in a very dark and, jaded way. And the fact that he's like calling out the FDA and saying they can't do their job because they're all deep state hacks. But then he's also saying we need to like quickly save lives. And the only people who are probably going to do that are the FDA. So he's calling them out and probably pissing off everyone in there and just calling out public opinion that probably doesn't have any trust in the efficacy of the FDA. So now I'd like to add some context to my first worry. There's a great article over at the New York Times that talks about when Gerald Ford in the 70s tried to rush a vaccine. And so basically what happened was in a military base in the South, there was a new version of H1N1. And so for people who don't know, H1N1 was what caused the Spanish flu. So rightfully so, there was a bit of a fear and panic going on after they found H1N1 resurging in this military base in New Jersey. And I understand it because of its track record. H1N1, or better known as swine flu, is pretty damn dangerous, and so I understand why the administration wanted to get a lead on it. And so on March 22nd of 1976, Gerald Ford met with his senior administration officials, and they recommended a mass vaccination program. But the problem was that an unnamed official at the World Health Organization noted that, in quotes, no other countries have plans for mass inoculations. So it was basically like the US were going to like streamline this vaccine, but no one else was doing it. So it's like, okay, cool. If this were to spread and become even an epidemic or potentially a pandemic, cool, the US has a vaccine, but no one else does. And so they were basically expressing concern that there was no point in doing this, especially with the ramifications of an expedited vaccine with dangerous side effects. And so luckily, this was a time, well, not luckily, but luckily for the United States, this was a time when the United States had a lot of sway, and they were able to basically bully the WHO into endorsing the vaccination program. But unfortunately, and fortunately, let's start with the good news, is that this strain of the swine flu was actually not very deadly, and it kind of festered out and died. But now the unfortunate part is that of the 45 million Americans who vaccinated themselves against the swine flu, 450 of them developed the paralyzing syndrome, which is Guillain-Barré. And of those, more than 30 died. And obviously, like, that's not like a crazy high number, but the fact that it was from a vaccine that was supposed to protect them from another problem, I think it's not good. It's not a good look. And so I think the message of this story, or the moral of this story, is that the world wasn't in agreement, And the United States decided to beat around the bush and go through several loopholes and expedite a vaccine. The problem is you need a global effort for a vaccine because, especially with a pandemic, the globe is being afflicted by it, not just one country. And second off, it seemed like if they had tested more, they would have noticed that there was a Guillain-Barré syndrome that could actually paralyze and kill people. And they would have probably seen that if there were more tests done. So Gerald Ford, who is definitely kind of a forgotten president, and there's not a lot on his track record. He did not have a great record with, I guess, expediting vaccines. And I just worried the same thing could happen here again. Like the kind of conclusion I have on my first fear here is that vaccines take time. And I think the key number here is that according to the FDA, by the time the phase 3 trial is completed, this takes months and typically involves more than 30,000 participants. That makes sense, right? If you're putting out something new, you want to make sure it's not going to mess up people. Anyways, my second concern is over the politics of this. I've heard commentators like David Pakman, who is probably one of the only progressives I listen to and agree with a lot of the time. And for months, he's been talking about how the Trump administration is going to push forward a vaccine in this October surprise. Right before the election, they put out something that's popular by the public. So I'm really curious about that, and I think this really could help Trump get a re-election. So we're gonna see.
You know, Nicole, it's so blatantly political. And we have a president who is so mistrusted. He's been so dishonest with everything. There's no way to discern whether he's actually talking about a breakthrough that would be effective and safe, or it's completely politically motivated. This is not normal times. It's not a normal president by any stretch. And we have no way of determining what the motivation is here. But the fact that this is going to be pushed for coming out before the election presents some real challenges. We have no idea whether the vaccine, which will not have been, I emphasize, not have been fully tested, will be safe for people. And to push this out a couple days before the election is absurd and reckless, in my opinion.
So, excuse my language, but I think this gentleman here had a really good point where we need to kind of separate whether Trump is actually talking about a medical breakthrough when he talks about a vaccine before the election, or if it's just bullshit that is meant to help him win again. And to me, I mean, let's just be honest. I mean, Drew and I talked about Occam's razor, a few months ago, and the simplest solution, or the one that needs the least amount of assumptions, is usually correct. Why would Trump want to put out a vaccine 2 days before the election? I don't know. But I just worry that that's where the country's at right now, is that we're so divided that we could put lives at risk for the sake of putting out a vaccine that will get you votes. Peter Hoditz, who is the dean of Baylor University's Tropical Medicine School, said that he was very concerned about whether the FDA would use an emergency authorization to approve a vaccine before knowing whether it works and is safe. He feels that this seems more like a publicity stunt than something actually worth public health benefits. And yeah, this goes back to what I said, but even if this is a stunt, I think it could be effective, because you're going to have voters on both sides who just want to get back to regular life. And, a lot of people don't follow the news like I do, or maybe you do. And some people are just going to say, sure, like, if it's going to help me get back to work and bring us to normalcy, let's do it. But now, ironically, I think the public are wary of a rushed vaccine. And then other parts of the public, especially the anti-vaxxer movement, who are also more, aligned with Trump than, say, Biden, they're not going to take this anyways. So I don't know who Trump's trying to appeal to here. Like, a lot of his voters already are against vaccines. They don't believe in science. So I think on that NBC video, I think it was a great part where it said science versus politics. That's where we're at right now. And now, before I'm out of here, I think my third concern is also the one that concerns me the most, and I think is the most serious. So I'm just worried that a vaccine in general that is only given to essential workers and people at risk would create a false sense of security for other people. I feel like we would see younger people, like my age, going out and not wearing masks, or not social distancing, or, taking less precautions, even if they live with someone who could be at risk. And that's the problem, is that this virus is not going to be going out to everybody at the same time, because an expedited virus is just going to go to the most vulnerable. So you're still going to have people who could get the virus and pass it. And I'm just worried that until a virus is expedited correctly and put out into the market correctly, I just worry that we're skipping a lot of steps in more of the public perception of what a virus is and how to deal with it. And the sad thing, though, is that I feel like by even releasing a half-assed vaccine, this would kind of go with the administration's mantra, which is that coronavirus is over and we're moving on. And I think that's why, in the end of the day, the Trump administration wants a vaccine out so quickly, is so they can kind of use the narrative that it's over. And, you know, that Shah, Nirav Shah, that I talked about earlier, who is the CDC director out of Maine, he went on to say that there is an inherent risk in approving this vaccine. He said rushing a vaccine into use could undermine confidence in the public health care system, particularly if the vaccine proved ineffective or unsafe. Shah also said that another downside of introducing this vaccine is that people might become overconfident and stop wearing masks. And that's my biggest concern, is that this administration likes to defy science. And if they could find a vaccine that kind of bounces along the lines of hope, faith, and science, it would probably get some people on their side, but it could hurt public health. Now, before I'm out of here, I do think it's important to note that Russia has done something very similar, using emergency powers to create as I call it, a half-assed vaccine. Several weeks ago, they pushed to produce a vaccine, and they were criticized heavily. But interestingly enough, today Bloomberg put out a report that says Russia's proposed COVID-19 vaccine induced an antibody response in all participants in early trials, and it found no serious adverse effects. They go on to say that the vaccine also produced a response in T cells, which is a type of white blood cell that helps the immune system destroy infection. This is interesting. And this kind of goes to where I do want to still be devil's advocate a little bit and say that just because a vaccine is rushed doesn't inevitably mean that it's going to be shit. Two things can be true at once. You can skip the parameters and still get something good, but it's just less likely that's going to happen, because these trials took place in 2 Russian hospitals, but only involved 76 healthy adults, according to Bloomberg, aged 18 to 60. I don't know if I like that. It's not enough cases, it's not enough tests, and it's just not enough time. So who knows the long-term effects? But again, I could be wrong. And, maybe a rushed vaccine, unfortunately, with how big of a world we live in, is what we need. Like, honestly, I'm not trying to just attack Trump for expediting a vaccine. I'm more just attacking the motives for why he wants to create a vaccine so quickly. And again, I like to listen to healthcare experts, and most of the healthcare experts are saying that it's just too quick. And my takeaway is that I remember when doctors were saying back in March that if you were to get COVID, you don't want to be one of the first people who are treated for it. And this is obviously true, because as we've seen, there have been a lot of horrible treatments, and a lot of the blood clots that we've seen, a lot of reports say it was traced back to bad handling by medical officials inside of hospitals. And in the same light, kind of going off of that, if we do create a vaccine quickly, I don't want to be the first person to, in line to take the vaccine. I think if people are highly at risk and there's something that can help, we should do it. But I don't know if you want to give this to your kids or people who are low at risk. I'm going to wait until 2021. I just worry right now that any vaccine that would be released to the public would be done so for political reasons. The president's known to do things like this, so I'm going to be cautious and think about the implications, and I think you guys should too. So with that, remember, I'm not trying to just bash Trump about a vaccine, but we need to look at this whole picture. So take care, thank you. Drew and I are actually off this week. End of Labor Day weekend. I'm going camping for a few days. He's moved places and he's still kind of getting everything set up. So we're taking this week off. So I'm going to put out this. We're going to re-release one of our relevant episodes and maybe have more catching ups later in the week. But we'll both be back to you guys in a week with more of our long form discussion. So take care, stay safe, and happy Labor Day.